And hello, everybody. Welcome back into another edition of SEC Talk here on this Sunday night. And another week is in the book here for SEC football as we're now into the month of November. Some teams stayed hot, and some teams are starting to fall off the SEC championship and college football playoff race. So it was a good week of SEC football. Probably not a good week for Wade as he was when it stepped into an exciting atmosphere, and that soon turned out to be a blowout for Alabama. So, Wade, other than that, how was your weekend?
Yeah, I mean, it was still a lot of fun to take in the game day atmosphere, see campus get, all excited for the game. But pretty much after the opening drive of Alabama, you knew it was going to be a long night. Tigers actually were able to string together a couple plays at the beginning and then couldn't answer that initial Alabama touchdown. And then it was just off to the races for Jalen Milroe and Alabama. But I still had a good weekend nonetheless. Enjoyed watching that Ole Miss game as well and the South Carolina game. Fun hack, if you are at an LSU game and you're a little tailgated out, you can go into the PMAC and watch college football on the giant screen in the AC. They sell water. It's quite nice. And you can dodge the rain that way too. So I did catch a little bit of the games outside of the LSU one, but yeah, the one that we wanted to happen, it just fell flat on its face for sure.
Yeah, so we did have some big games, Alabama, LSU, Ole Miss, Georgia, but outside of the conference, we did have another upset. How about Georgia Tech upsetting number 4 Miami?
Yeah.
Miami had a couple of close wins, so I feel like this was just like their luck running out. So that creates some chaos. Penn State, they look good against Washington.
Oregon keeps solid.
Oregon just continues to dominate. Ohio State continues to dominate too. So it's looking like we're going to have a lot of SEC and Big Ten teams in there. And you can't forget about a team that no one is really talking about is SMU. I think that they're definitely an underdog story right now. Indiana, they're a unit right now. They're 10-0 heading into their bye week. So those are just some teams to look out for outside of the conference. We will definitely talk more about it as we get into our top 6. But before we get into our top 6 of heading into Week 2 of the Tuesday night rankings that will be released by ESPN, their college football playoff rankings, we first have to talk about the SEC teams in the AP Top 25 poll. Your usual suspects outside of one team here. We now have 9 SEC teams here in this poll. As you notice, Georgia is no longer in the top 5. It's now Texas. They are the only SEC team in the top 5 right now after dominating performance against Florida, putting up 49 points. Against Florida, a team, with a third-string quarterback going into there. But number 6, Tennessee, really nice win for them at home against Mississippi State. They got a big challenge coming up against Georgia. Alabama, definitely the story of the weekend, dominating performance against the Tigers in Baton Rouge. So they move up a couple of spots. So they're now in the top 10 and back in the college football playoff race. So we look at the rest of the schedule, really sets up nicely for Kalen DeBoer's squad. And how about Ole Miss? They're also the movers of the weekend, and they're right back into college football playoff contention, as is Alabama. With their win against Georgia, like Alabama, Ole Miss schedule, I think, also sets up nicely for them. So look out for Alabama and Ole Miss down the stretch for B2 teams to be in that college football playoff contention race. So we see Ole Miss rounding out the teams in the top 10. And who would have thought that we'd be talking about Georgia outside of the top 10? At the moment, they got handed their second loss, and honestly, they got dominated. Ole Miss really dominated them from start to finish. Georgia was able to get that early touchdown, but outside of that, Ole Miss's defense stepped up. So Georgia moves down from 2 to 11. Number 15, Texas A&M. They enjoyed the bye week, and they pretty much have, just a walk in the park opponent with New Mexico State. They don't have, Diego Pavia there anymore, so that shouldn't be a threat to Texas A&M. And then the fallers of the weekend was LSU. Disappointing performance by the Tigers, which we will definitely get into. But LSU, their college football playoff hopes are all but gone at this point, and they'll probably be either playing in the Citrus Bowl or the Outback Bowl once again. So if you're an LSU fan, definitely a disappointing outcome of the season. And then number 23, South Carolina team, that has definitely caught our eyes, flying under the radar. No longer are the South Carolina Gamecocks, so they continue to climb up. I'm got to be sure that they're going to be in the college football playoff rankings once that time comes. Then number 24, Missouri, they stay after a heck of a game. If you missed that game between Oklahoma and Missouri ending up pulling off that comeback. So what are your overall thoughts of this AP poll before we get into our top 6 here?
I think it's pretty fair, honestly. I think Tennessee hanging in there at number 6 is fair. I think you can make an argument that they're a top 5 team even. But I like them there. They got a lot to prove this weekend. I like Ole Miss jumping Georgia, obviously, because of the on-field results. And I don't think you can drop Georgia much further than you did. So that's fine. A&M moves up a little bit despite being on the bye. And then, LSU ahead of South Carolina and Missouri. I mean, I think all those teams are about the same. South Carolina and Missouri, of course, will face off this weekend, and that will decide that. So I think they did a good job. I'm feeling a lot better about Texas at the moment. I know it was Florida, but we kind of saw that dominance that we were seeing early in the season. And Ole Miss is a team that I've written off several times this year, and they're just not going away. So,
Yep.
They're in pretty good shape as well. And it's going to be interesting to see which of those first 6 teams there, you got to think 2 of them will make the conference championship. And right. I think at this point, almost all of them are mathematically in the hunt.
Yeah, absolutely. So those are your teams in the AP Top 25 poll now that we will do pretty much every week now once this show ends, is that we're going to do our top 6, what we think the committee is going to come out with. So how do you think that, heading into week 2 of these rankings being released, how will the top 6 fare out?
I would still have Oregon at number 1. They're the last undefeated team, and within the SEC and the Big Ten, I guess you got Indiana as well. But Oregon at number 1. I'll put Ohio State at number 2. Texas at number 3. Number 4. We had Miami, and they're out now.
Yeah.
You know what? Call me crazy. Number 4, Indiana. I mean, look, they're undefeated. They're in a top conference. They now have kind of a key victory against Michigan. I know they're not great, but they handled business. Number 5, I'll slot Tennessee there at number 5. And then number 6, I'll give it to Penn State.
Yeah, I have the same teams, but in a different order. Oregon, they've been dominant pretty much all season. They have the win against Ohio State, so they get number 1. I'm actually going to go with Texas number 2. I just think that their resume, in my opinion, is definitely better. I know that, Ohio State has the win over Penn State, but outside that, they don't really have many quality wins. So I'm going to slide Texas over Ohio State, and then Ohio State's going to be my number 3 team. My number 4 team, not going to be Indiana. It's going to be Penn State there. I'm going to slide them in. Their one loss, they didn't look good in that game, but it is to one of the best teams in the country in Ohio State. And outside of that game, Penn State has really looked dominant. And then number 5 will be Indiana, still undefeated, 10-0. If they can handle business in 2 weeks here against Ohio State, that would really shape up for an interesting story for the Hoosiers. And then number 6 is Tennessee. I still have faith in that team. We'll see how they do on the road against Athens, because that rivalry game is always heated. So there you go. That is our top 6. We will have to tune in on Tuesday night to see how the rankings are and see where our SEC teams stand heading into week number 12 of this college football season. So that is our poll talk. Now let's get into some reminders. If you have any questions pertaining to SEC football or even football outside the conference, we'll definitely be happy to answer it here. So feel free to leave us a comment. I would have to assume that we're going to have a lot of angry LSU fans in the comments, so I'm going to be ready for some coaching questions at the end of it, maybe some quarterback questions too. So if you have anything pertaining to what happened this past Saturday, definitely chime into the comments. We will answer that after a hot topic segment. All right, let's get into one of our first of many segments here on the show, and that is SEC Fantasy. It feels like this has just been the season of myself, but Wade, let's see if you can get back on track. You had a pretty good squad here. I mean, Jalen Milroe, you saw him in person, what he did, and then outside of that, Jordan Watkins didn't have like the 260-yard showing that we had outside of that. But just go ahead and take us through how your team did in week number 11, excuse me, and we'll see if it panned out to a W for you.
Yeah, Jalen Nora was the star of the weekend. He had 294 yards. I think he had just over 100 passing. So he mainly ran the football and had, of course, 3 rushing touchdowns. So just really dominating performance against LSU. It was one that I feared, and that's why I picked him. I knew that he could, do what he did with his legs. And honestly, Ryan Williams owes him another 59 yards because he had a dot on a Hail Mary that was dropped. So I think he was, inches away from tacking on some more yardage to this performance. So kudos to Milroe. Quintravion Wisner. Well, the running back that had 0 rushing yards.
I'm glad you noticed that too.
But he salvaged his day with a lovely 50-yard touchdown reception and another 9-yard reception.
Hey, you wouldn't have been able to have that in like a couple years back, but since we had the total yardage, you get the receiving yards, and that might win you the day right there.
Well, look, Texas has a stable of running backs, and they rotate them around. I thought Wisner was the guy. He had 17 carries the week before, 11 the week before that. But they opted to go to a freshman. Name is slipping out of my head right now, but they had 3 or 4 guys carry the rock, and I guess Wisner was more of a receiving back. But I did see his touchdown against Florida. It was very early in the game, so maybe he did get injured or something later. But he did his damage when it counted. Got me 59 yards, all in the air. Jordan Watkins, he was the wide receiver 1 from Ole Miss by default. Trey Harris was out, so Watkins was their number 1 wide receiver. He had 68 total yards. Really, once Ole Miss got up and their defense played incredibly, they were able to run the football, and they didn't really need to air it out as much. So I think that's a good sign for Ole Miss. They were able to manhandle a team like Georgia and run the football. And the Tennessee defense, they were very stout against Mississippi State, holding the Bulldogs to just 271 total yards. So Tennessee did exactly what I needed. Anytime you can get under 300 yards in a conference matchup, you'll take it. And that gives me an even 150. So I think that's a pretty respectable score.
Yeah, this late in the season, that is definitely the score that you're looking for. So, I'm glad that you noticed that Quintravion Wisner had a goose egg in rushing yards. What do you say today with that 50-yard receiving touchdown? So, like I mentioned, those total yardage saved the day for you. Potentially gave you the win, but we will have to see as we now head over to my team. I had the guy that was facing Jalen Milroe. If this was real life fantasy, Jalen Milroe probably would have had like 30 or 40 fantasy points, and Garrett Nussmeier, well, he probably would have had like 15 because he threw a couple of interceptions, had a fumble. But nonetheless, he had some garbage time yards that got him over to 200 yards and close to 250, 247 yardage. But if you ask him, that probably wasn't his best performance. And we did have an injury. I did pick Javonte Barnes. Well, he was out in this one, so I had to just go with the next man up, and that was Xavier Robinson. 63 yards against Missouri, so that's not too shabby, especially for a guy that you didn't know was going to start, but that's just SEC fantasy for you. And then, well, I guess this just bit me in the butt of picking 2 LSU guys. It did not go well for them, but Kyron Lacy, the 79 yards, I'm not going to say this was his best performance either. The LSU offense, they had 13 points, but it was just like a gimme touchdown there at the end that Kyron Lacy was able to get to save him the day. And my gosh, Ole Miss's defense, 245 yards. That was one hell of a pick, but it wasn't enough. It wasn't enough. I blame it on the LSU players for knocking my score down. But yeah, Quintravion Wisner's 50-yard receiving touchdown was the difference in this one. 150 to 44. You do the math, that's only a 6-yard difference. So with that, Wade, I know it's only 6 yards, but you did pick up your 3rd win now on the season. Yes. How's our SEC fantasy overall doing right now?
Yes, that brought me to 3-8 on the season.
All
We're
right,
less
you like
worried
the
about the
Saints.
record as we are about the total yardage. So with the 6-yard advantage, I cut into the deficit. I am now 713 yards behind your pace. So I got some work to do over the next 2 weeks and bowl season. But
Yep.
yeah, you've had a pretty comfortable grip on SEC fantasy this year. But hey, a lot of football to go.
Yep, 3 more regular season weeks to go. You have rivalry week, and you know that last rivalry week, you just never know what's going to happen. I mean, somebody could go off for 500 yards or something. You just never know what happen. So those 700 yards look big, but they could definitely, get down there if you have a big week. So you're going to need a big week here in these next couple of weeks. So you do have the first pick in the SEC fantasy draft coming up. But before we do that, got to remind our viewers of the rules here on SEC Fantasy. First, the rosters and how they're built. 1 quarterback, 1 running back, a receiver, and a defense. And then our main rules that we use every single week here on this show. Cannot draft the same player twice in back-to-back weeks. We've been pretty good on that. And then once you draft a defense, you can't use them again. So we used 11 defenses so far, only 3 more to go. And we are definitely dwindling down the list as we go. And also in the bowl season, that list will wipe away. Just going to be all free game at that point. So let's now go into week 12 of SEC Fantasy. You did have the number 1 pick in the draft. You obviously did it on a defense, so we'll get into that defense here in a few minutes. But now let's get to the quarterbacks. You're going to go with a new face here on the show, but this guy has been balling out for the Gamecocks. Lenore Seller of South Carolina. He's going up against Missouri. Quinn Ewers would have been a good pick for me. He had over 300 yards passing and 5 touchdowns against that Florida defense. This week against Arkansas's defense. The last time we saw him on the field, well, they gave up 63 points to Ole Miss. So Lenore Sellers, how do you feel about that matchup going against that Missouri defense that's been struggling as of late?
Yeah, I'm just going with the hot hand. Lenore Sellers pretty much single-handedly beat Texas A&M. And then he followed it up with another really stout performance this week against Vanderbilt. So I think he keeps it up coming into Williams-Brice Stadium at home at night against Missouri. I think that game's going to be very back and forth. So I think the quarterback play is going to have to be top-notch, and I think Sellers delivers. But your guy, Ewers, I mean, he's just a SEC veteran at this point. We've seen him on the show a good bit when he's healthy, and really – I know he's probably out of the Heisman race, but don't you have to think that he's in the running for SEC quarterback of the year? If it's not Milroe?
Definitely. He's definitely got to be one of the top ones. I feel like it's between Milroe, Ewers, and Jackson Dart at this point. Those are probably the top 3 quarterbacks. But like I mentioned, going up against Arkansas defense, I just let up over 500 yards passing to Jackson Dart and 63 points, to this Ole Miss offense. And I think that Texas, they are just in rhythm right now. So, hey, really like this pick. It's on the road. Last time, this is a rivalry game. This is an old Southwest battle between the Horns and the Hogs. But Quinn Ewers, he's definitely been playing well, definitely healthy now. But Lenore Sellers, that's your first Gamecock of the year, so you can scratch that off of the list of taking a South Carolina. That just leaves Kentucky for you, and let's see if you knock him out. Looks like you are. I'm not even going to try and pronounce this dude's last name. You can try to do it, but we're just going to call him Demi. So Demi is our first Kentucky offensive player here on the show, so give everyone an applause. Kentucky is back on the SEC Fantasy Hype Train, Raheem Sanders. I'm using my South Carolina player right here, and it's hard not to shy away from what Raheem Sanders has done. And no, he is also an SEC veteran too, but he's also wearing a different uniform. He was with Arkansas for the past couple of years, and now he's with South Carolina. So talk about Demi's matchup. I can't remember. I believe that Kentucky's playing a cupcake this week, so that's probably the reason why you're going with them.
Yeah, Kentucky's playing Murray State. They're 1-9 in the FCS, so this would be a good of a time as ever.
Good basketball game, it would be.
Yes, it would be a good Sweet 16 game if John Morant was suiting up for the Racers. But he is not, and I think that this is when we should get our Kentucky picks in. You inspired me, a little foreshadowing. Tyler took his Kentucky guy too at wide receiver, so I latched on to the running back here, and I actually watched him play against Georgia, and he touted the rock pretty well. So let's see what he can do for me here in week 12.
Well, back-to-back weeks, I'm going to go against that Missouri rush defense. I was going to go with Javante Barnes, ended up working out for me. But Raheem Sanders, I feel confident in him. South Carolina's offense has been rolling, just put up 28 points against a solid Vanderbilt defense. So I think Raheem Sanders, this is a team that likes to run the ball, whether that's Sellers with a read option or just hand the ball off to Raheem Sanders and let him do his work. So you are completing your players with both Kentucky and South Carolina this week. As you mentioned, I did myself. So that is it for all the SEC teams that we used. So we did a pretty good job. It only took us 12 weeks to do it. So you see Demi and Raheem Sanders. If you can actually pronounce that dude's last name, I'll give you $5. So let's go on to the next
20
one.
yards.
Wide receivers now. Carn Lacey, well, you're back on the SEC fantasy team. Well, you're not on my team. You're on Wade's team, as LSU will now face off against Florida, a team that just gave up 49 points to Kentucky. And then Dane Key, that is my first Kentucky player. Like Wade mentioned, Murray State 1-9. I feel like this is the best opportunity to get a Kentucky player because, well, their game's coming up isn't too easy for them. Carn Lacey, I know he had 79 yards, but how does this LSU offense bounce back against a Florida defense that's definitely gettable?
Yeah, I think that Kyron Lacey is still just the focal point of the LSU offense, and we know Nussmeier can sling it, and I think the game just kind of got away from him against Alabama. So I still have a lot of confidence in this LSU offense. I think they can rack up some yards against a banged-up Florida team. But I also think that Florida might get DJ Lagway back, and it might be a little bit more of a back-and-forth game.
Yeah, well.
So I think that plays well for SEC fantasy purposes. I think Lacey has at least one touchdown. I think, he's not like that 150-yard-a-game threat that LSU is used to having. He's more of a possession receiver, but I could see him getting about what he did this week. 70 to 80 yards and a touchdown would be quite nice.
Yeah, absolutely. That DJ Lagway news could definitely, change the tides there for Florida. If he does, take the over because both defenses have not been playing so well as of late. Like I mentioned, I'm going to go Dean Key. It's Murray State. They're 1-9. This is wide receiver 1. So Kentucky, if they're going to find the end zone, then you're going to hand the ball off, or they're going to throw it and get some yardage to Dane Key. So you know what? Just give me over 50 yards and I'll be happy. So let's go on now to the defenses, probably the two best defenses to get this weekend. Texas A&M, they're facing off against Mexico State. Kentucky, this is like the most love that they've gotten on SEC fantasy all year. They had their running back, the receiver, and now I'm picking their defense. Last time that we saw their defense on this show, they gave up 500 yards to Auburn. So hopefully they don't give up 500 yards to Murray State, or Kentucky's just banned from the show to ever be talked about again. So talk about Texas A&M's defense. Obviously, they're one of the best defensive fronts in the country. I feel like you waited long enough to use them. If they give up like 150 yards or less, you will probably take that.
Yeah, I think that the wait was worthwhile to take Texas A&M here against New Mexico State. Just a team that I was keeping in my back pocket if I didn't have to use them. And I told you last week if I won SEC Fantasy, I was going to take them. So it kind of worked out in that regard. But yeah, this is as good of a unit as any of them. And after the way the SEC game shook out this weekend, A&M's got a lot to fight for coming out of that bye week. So I think this team's going to be fired up. Even though it's a non-conference game, I think they'll make a statement.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Kentucky, this is your redemption story because the last time, like I mentioned, didn't do so hot. But Murray State, just give me under 250 and I will take that. So hopefully Kentucky's defense can rise to the challenge and Kentucky can get back on the board in the win column. So A&M and Kentucky are our defenses there. Tune in the next week's show and see how our teams fared out. We will see if we continue to be in the positives because so far, none of us has been the negatives, knock on wood, but hopefully that streak continues for us. Now let's go on to some of our key games that happened here in week number 11 in the SEC. The first one was the top 16 battle in Oxford, Mississippi, between number 3 Georgia and number 16 Ole Miss. Ole Miss came away with a cruising victory, 28-10. Like I mentioned, Georgia, they got that early touchdown, they ran it in. But after that, Ole Miss, so they got the news of Trey Harris. No Trey Harris, no Henry Parrish in this one. He suffered a gruesome injury against Arkansas. So those are two key weapons that Ole Miss was, and their offense just continues to roll. Jackson Dart playing like the caliber of a quarterback that we saw him in the preseason. Ole Miss's defense is definitely the story of the season. Lane Kiffin went into the transfer portal and got some guys. Because if you remember last year's game, this was all Georgia. They put up 51 points. And I feel like from that point on, like Lane Kiffin was like, all right, we can't let this happen again. Let's go get some dudes in the transfer portal. They got some weapons on the offensive side of the ball. You saw some guys step up on the offense. Luasis Grant, the Ole Miss running back. Then you also saw Jordan Watkins, Lee as well. And then the tight end Prescore and really stepped up. So I feel like from start to finish, this was just an Ole Miss masterclass at this point. So Ole Miss now with this win, back in the college football playoff race. Now Georgia with 2 losses. You really look at them. The SEC championship is likely out for them, barring any chaos. So that's definitely a surprise to us because, Georgia was one of the favorites to not only go to Atlanta, but win the SEC championship. So that's definitely a surprise. But you got to be impressed with this Ole Miss team. I know, they had the early loss to Kentucky, had the loss, honestly, that you look back on it, they probably shouldn't have lost to LSU, but LSU, made couple of plays here at the end to win that game. So overall, how do you like this Ole Miss team, through 11 weeks of the season?
Yeah, I kind of thought they would fold after that LSU loss. It's pretty gut-wrenching. They had just lost to Kentucky the 2 weeks prior, and they've really rebounded nicely, and they know it's do or die. They have to win out, even against a team like Georgia. So honestly, I think this team's right about where we thought they would be. I thought maybe they'd have 1 loss, but, if you would have told me this team had 2 losses at this point, and it's important to who those losses were to, because everybody you lost to is behind you in the standings, whereas a lot of the teams that you lost to, or a lot of the teams, in the same spot of the standings as them have lost to each other, and there's tiebreakers. So Ole Miss is in good shape in the regard that LSU and Kentucky really don't have a chance at the conference championship. So they're in really good shape. So trade the Kentucky loss for the Georgia win in my book and just go forward from here. You got maybe, at least a top 3 quarterback in the SEC. When Trey Harris is healthy, you're going to have the best wide receiving group in the SEC. And I don't think there's a team that wants to play Ole Miss after they see what just happened to Georgia.
No, this is a team that's playing right, hot at the right time. And looking at their schedule, like I mentioned, really sets up nicely for them. The Egg Bowl, the way that Mississippi State's looking for them. So I think, I believe that they also have Auburn too. I can't remember the other team that they play. But Ole Miss with the big victory at home against Georgia. Let's go on to the next one. The team, we talked about this one on last week's show, that both of these teams really riding some momentum. It's South Carolina continuing to ride that momentum. Now they're bowl eligible. This was, Vanderbilt. They got their 6th win last week. South Carolina needed this one to get to it, and they did it. And this was pretty dominant too, 28-7. Diego Pavia did get hurt in this one, so we will definitely have to monitor how that injury plays out. But South Carolina's defense, like the story, like I mentioned, of Ole Miss, their defensive front has been the story of the way that this team has played. Lenore Sellers continues to ball out every single week. Raheem Sanders. So South Carolina probably going to be a top 25 team by the time the rankings come out on Tuesday. So this is a team I feel like if they really had like Ole Miss, they hit the LSU game, they should have won that game. And the Alabama game, they probably should have won that game.
LSU could be in a lot more trouble.
Yeah. So we could be talking about this team, be like 1-2 losses and being right in the college football playoff race. But since they have 3 losses, they're definitely out of that. But if they can continue to stack up wins, they do have that Clemson game at the end of it. But Clemson has looked beatable at times this season. So going on the road to Nashville is not easy. So you also got to be impressed with South Carolina, just walk into Nashville and dominating this one. And I don't know if you noticed, the social media team for South Carolina had just been absolutely cooking because they brought the receipts out. I can't even remember the last time that South Carolina lost to Vanderbilt. It's been a while, and the social media team just put it right in Vanderbilt's face. What were your overall thoughts about South Carolina just going in there and proving a point to Vandy that South Carolina still owns them?
Yeah, Vanderbilt's best year, and South Carolina derails it. Heck, even when James Franklin was at Vanderbilt, South Carolina was still beating them. So whenever these new, guaranteed rivalries or whatever they're going to call them are released next year, I mean, Vanderbilt has to hope that South Carolina is not one of them because they don't want to play them every year. But yeah, the Gamecocks are they're hot right now. They're a team that kind of struggles in August and September, and for whatever reason, it always seems like they're relying on a lot of young skill position players, and they just kind of find their own late in the year. And it doesn't matter who they're playing. It could be Texas A&M, it could be Vanderbilt, it could be Clemson in 2 weeks. Like, this team just gets hot at the right time and should have a very interesting home stretch of the season. But in this game specifically, I was just impressed with Lenora Sellers' efficiency and just the ability to take over the game. Going into it, we knew we had two mobile quarterbacks that kind of struggle sometimes with pushing the ball downfield, but Sellers didn't show any of that, and he was able to really give South Carolina a comfortable lead, and they just held on. They just held on to it. Not much to it, and the defense, they continue to get better and better. They got a lot of key veterans on that defense, but the defensive line is pretty young, and then that's kind of their standout group.
Yeah, this team, I feel like it's not going to go anywhere. They get a lot of returners back next year. You're going to be losing Raheem Sanders, but outside of that, you got to feel really good about this team heading into the 2025.
Need a good receiver.
Yeah, we'll see what Shane Beamer does. Like we also talking about Shane Beamer, like he was one of our top lists of being on the hot seat. I feel like that seat has really cooled off as South Carolina just continues to put on nice performances throughout the season. So we will see if he gets an extension or not. We will keep news on that. Let's go on to the next one in the SEC that happened, a big old Big 12 battle between Oklahoma and number 24 Missouri. This was a baseball score at the half. It was 9-6 for about 3 quarters, and then all of a sudden it was just mad chaos. Missouri went up. You felt like it was over. They went up 17-6. Oklahoma responded, ended up tying the game. And Missouri got the ball back, and then Missouri fumbled. It was a scoop and score. And then Missouri got the ball back again. They scored, and there was another fumble. It was just chaos. Like, what the heck happened in the final 3 minutes? It was just a drunk SEC football game. It was like, oh, this is just going to be like a 12-9 game. And then you see a look up at the final score. It's 30-23. So if you didn't watch the game, no, both of these offenses didn't do, we're going back and forth with each other. The offenses were struggle. I mean, Drew Pine versus Jackson Arnold. Not the two quarterbacks that you think
better in the high school recruiting rankings.
Yeah, absolutely. But nonetheless, Missouri does get the victory. It was an ugly game. I'm not really even going to I don't even know what to say at this point about this game. It was just a drunk 3 minutes of this game. I'm not sure if you caught the last few minutes of this game. You picked Oklahoma. Ended up being Missouri in this one, but I don't know really what to say of this one. Do you have any thoughts about this game? Because it was absolutely crazy down the stretch.
Well, this was like the only game I didn't see a score update for in Tiger Stadium. So when I got home, I watched the 20-minute recap, and I had no idea what to expect. So I just turned it on and was watching it. And Oklahoma was up most of the game. Then Luther Burden had a couple nice plays, and all of a sudden Missouri was winning. It seemed like, and then Oklahoma got the fumble recovery for a touchdown, and they were winning. And I said, I got Tyler on this one. And then no, because Jackson Arnold could not hold on to the damn football. This is like probably the 10th fumble I've seen him have this year. And he gets strip sacked. I don't even want to say strip sacked. I mean, just careless with the football.
Yeah.
You got to get that ball close to your chest. And sure enough, Missouri was able to pounce on it and recover it for a touchdown. So
Yeah, we had 2 scooping scores in the,
two
last
scooping
3 minutes
scores.
of the game. It was
Yeah,
wild.
yeah, very wild for sure. I think that's an underrated night atmosphere. Missouri doesn't
Mhm.
get too many night games, just the way the schedule shakes up. But there's been some really iconic um, SEC games in Missouri at night. I mean, I remember South Carolina and Missouri playing a few really, really good games there at night, and then this one here was right up there with it. So it was a good game for sure. I think that both of these teams are beat up with some injuries and definitely are not living up to their expectations. But Missouri, they
They're living
only
up to mine.
have
I said
two
10-2
conference
bowl
losses.
season, so they'd have to win out for that to happen, which we will see.
Could
But
happen.
yeah, this was definitely one of the games to watch if you're an SEC fan this past weekend. But last but not least, it was our SEC talk game of the week. I was hoping for a closer game that we could go into discussion, but who would have thought that this would be the score of this one? 42-13, number 11 Alabama takes down LSU. Once again in Tiger Stadium, they got revenge from 2 years ago. But outside of that game, I mean, this has been a series that's been dominated by Alabama, especially in this building. Like you mentioned, Wade, a lot of hype, a lot of build up, and then it just feels like 2018, like all over again. If you're an LSU fan, I mean, if you remember that game day was there, it was a lot of hype. They kicked the ball off and it was loud. They got a false start, they got a penalty. You're thinking, all right, 1st and 15. And then all of a sudden, Alabama's in the end zone, and Jalen Milroe scored like a 45-yard rushing touchdown. And then after that, it was pretty much a ball game. Obviously, there was a lot of moments that LSU, could have flipped the script. You got that 4th down stop. And then Garrett Nussmeier, like you were just talking about with Jackson Arnold, he couldn't hold on to the football. And Alabama got the short field. And once again, Jalen Milroe scored a rushing touchdown. It was literally the same thing that happened last year that I said that I was concerned about with Jalen Milroe rushing and, being a threat to pretty much beat the crap out of you. And that's exactly what happened. The same thing that happened last year happened again. You have 2
Yeah, it
weeks to
was
prepare.
deja vu.
Yeah, it was. You had 2 weeks to prepare for this game, and this is how your team comes out. Definitely a lot of question marks. It is warranted to come out of the LSU fan base. So, Wade, I know that you were at the game. Definitely give us thoughts on the atmosphere because I know early on, it was feeling like Death Valley, but outside of that, I mean, just you got to feel disappointed of all those fans that spent a whole lot of money. This is probably like their only game that they could go to. They made trips to go to this game, and they were disappointed. But obviously, on Alabama's side, you got to feel really good about them going down the stretch. So I'm going to shut up and give you, Wade's perspective from the stands at Tiger Stadium on Saturday.
Wade's perspective was getting
Not
rained
good.
on for 2 hours in the upper deck. But no, it was a fun atmosphere. I mean, the light show has really been a good addition in my opinion. Gets everybody pumped up. They've redone some of the entrance videos too, and I mean, there is a lot of excitement around this game as it is, but I think that some of the theatrics brought that energy level up. There was a flyover, drone show at halftime, so all that was fun. The Tiger was kind of lackluster, but
That Tiger was overweight.
yeah, and they didn't bring him around the stadium. He just came out for like 30
Yeah,
seconds.
I have
So
my thoughts. We won't say it.
yeah, I mean, I don't know. It is what it is, but yeah, the game itself. I mean, Alabama dominated this one. Don't get me wrong, but this game was within reach for a lot longer than you would think. I mean,
Yeah.
it was 6 or 7-0. LSU should have went right down and answered it, and they didn't. They just got a field goal, so 7-3. Okay, Alabama has another dominating drive. They score. It's 14-3. LSU goes down and gets a field goal, 14-6. And there was still no answer for Milroe. He had another long touchdown, and it was 21-6. But at that point, LSU's defense finally settled in. and mind you, when it was 14-6, they made a big play, and then LSU turned it right back over,
Yep.
which is why it was 21-6. So you were really in it right there
Mm-hmm.
because LSU's defense made a stop. It was 14-6. They squandered it. Well, then LSU gets the ball back, and they have a nice drive going. And for whatever reason, they let the clock run out before the half. I would love to have seen a shot at the end zone, try to bring it to 21-14 before the half, but they didn't. And then I think that they still had a chance in the second half, in the third quarter, until Milrow had the 70-yard touchdown.
I mean,
And
they
at
were
that point,
driving
it
in
was,
the first drive and they got a penalty. I mean, that was like
yeah.
the story of the game. Like LSU got a big play and then boom, penalty.
And then I think it was later on that drive, the deep throw to Kyron Lacey. I mean, he had a nice play and slipped at the 3, and then Nussmeier throws the interception. Like if you would have scored there, all of a sudden it's a 2-possession ball game, and it just, I don't know, it just really got out of hand after that. I think after that Nussmeier interception, because I think that would have made it 21-14, and then Alabama scored the next 14 points, and then of course LSU scored with like 5 seconds left. I've been to 4 LSU Alabama games now, and I've seen 1 touchdown, so that just kind of sums it up.
Yeah, that's if only the 2019 game was at home in Tiger Stadium, that would definitely flip the script for you at least. But yeah, this a lot of question marks for LSU. But if you're an Alabama fan, you got to feel pretty good about your squad now. I mean, you talk about this was a team that struggled on the road. They lost to Vanderbilt, and then they struggled. Who else did they struggle against on the road? I can't remember. Tennessee. Yes, that's right.
They lost to Tennessee. They almost lost to South Carolina.
Yes. So, yeah, this is a team that's playing really well. Jalen Milrow can play like that every single day, and that defense can play like that. I mean, this is going to be a scary team to deal with in the college football playoff. So, Kalen Bohr got those boys playing really well. And look at their schedule. They got Mercer. They have, I can't remember. I see it's like all this alignment. I know they have Auburn, the Iron Bowl, but outside of that, they might win out and make it to the college football playoff. So, we will see if they can take care of business. But that is our games. We'll see how our crew did. Wade and Chet went 3-3, 4-2. It was a midweek for us. Let's just call it that. It wasn't that great. 2 500s, 1 4-2. Thank you, Missouri. And we will continue on now with our Week 12 games in Pick'em. And once again, Texas, well, you have to play at 11 a.m. You have to play Florida at 11 a.m. And now you have to play Arkansas on the road. But number 3, Texas just continues to roll. Arkansas was on the bye, and they needed that one after Ole Miss just put up a spanking on them the prior week of that. So the last time we saw this, I believe this was the game that Arkansas pulled off the upset at home. Do you see that happening again, or do you just see Texas just continuing on this train?
I mean, I don't know. I guess it just depends if Jalen Green is healthy in this one. You'd hope he is, but he's, this team's just pretty different if he's not in there. And he's got to be mobile if he's in there. He can't just be a pocket passer. You have to have the threat of his legs. I think that is a big part of his game. But I think Texas is too focused. I mean, they lost to Georgia. It was a okay loss. You really didn't lose any ground. So I think this team's on the right track. I think they have the prize in sight, and I think they win pretty handedly.
Yeah, they definitely see the path is there to not only the playoff, but the SEC championship is right there for the taking. A couple of weeks, we will be talking about that big game in College Station against A&M. Feels like the winner of that game is definitely going to lock up a spot in the SEC championship. Might be a rematch of that. It just depends if Tennessee, loses this week as well, because that's the only other one-loss team in this race. But I am going to go Texas. Arkansas's defense. They had their games this week, but going up against this high-powered Texas's offense has been feeling themselves of late. I don't think this one's going to be pretty close. And also, Chet's going to go with the Texas Longhorns, all rolling with the Burnt Orange this week. Moving on to the next morning game. Yep, this game deserves to be on like the CW at like 9:30 a.m. in the morning of UL Monroe at Auburn. ULM is honestly not that bad of a football team. They were close to getting that 6th win, but They ended up getting beat by Texas State at home. So the Warhawks are still looking for that 6th win to make them bowl eligible. Auburn, well, they need to win out to get the bowl eligibility. So do you have Auburn beating the Warhawks, or do you have the Warhawks pulling off the upset here?
I think Auburn gets it done. But, if this game was earlier in the year, I might have picked UL Monroe because I think they started the year 5-1, but they've lost 3 in a row. So they got to get on the right track. And I just don't see it happening at Jordan-Hare. I think this is Auburn's last win, but I think they at least give themselves a chance going into their final 2 games. I think they have A&M and Alabama. So
Yep,
I don't
not
think they
happening.
get to a bowl game, but I think they keep the hopes alive for another week.
Well, since you said that, this will be the last time that you see Auburn's logo on my name. But I'm going to go with this one. I think it's going to be closer than Auburn fans want. ULM is a pretty good team. I know they just lost 38-17 to Texas State, but I'm going to go with Auburn at home. Probably going to be like a low-scoring game because both of these offenses have been playing well. Chet's also going to go with Auburn, so a clean sweep once again. Go on to the next one. I hate these games this late in the season. My gosh, why are we playing 1-9 Murray State this late in the season? Should never happen. Hopefully just give me 9 SEC games at this point because I'm sick of these games. But Murray State at Kentucky. This is not basketball. This is on the football field. So do we have Kentucky picking up probably their last one of the season as well?
Yeah, because they have 2 ranked game as well. They have Texas and Louisville to finish
They
the
get
year.
Texas.
So, yeah, Texas and
Great
Louisville.
for them.
Yeah. By the way, Alabama has Mercer, Oklahoma, and Auburn. So yeah, they're gonna win.
Alabama, welcome to the college football playoff once again.
But yeah, Kentucky, we gave them their spotlight in SEC fantasy, and it's not really because they're a good offense; it's because of who they're playing.
Yep.
And yeah, I don't know. This team had a lot of hope. I just kept thinking this offense was going to grow into itself. They have a really good receiving core. I don't know if it's Vandergrift's fault or not, but I don't know. When Mark Stoops accepted and then didn't accept the A&M job, that whole fiasco, I just think this team never really.
A&M fans are definitely grateful that he declined.
Yeah, I mean, this is a very vanilla, boring offense, and I think that he kind of lost his fan base and his team a little bit in that, but they should win on Saturday.
Yeah, I'm going to give them the win. I'm not really too high on this team, but it's Murray State. You should be able to take care of them pretty easily there. Hopefully, Dane Key. And your running back does well, too. So, Chet, another clean sweep of another boring game in the SEC. Can somebody play somebody? Nope. Nobody's playing anybody this week. You know what? Who cares? Alabama, move on. Stop playing Mercer this late in the season. All right, let's move on to this. I feel like Mercer has played Alabama and Auburn like 50 times in the past decade. I feel like that's
absolutely,
like
and it's not even in Alabama.
As it always does. But finally, a game that we can actually talk about on this show. It's a rivalry game, an old SEC East versus West. Number 21 LSU at Florida. Florida just needs a win at this point. I mean, they've gone through an absolute gauntlet of a schedule, so they're desperate just to get back on the win column. LSU, well, they're also desperate to get back on the win column because they just got boat raced by Alabama at home. LSU has won like the past 5 or 6 games here in this rivalry, so this has been a rivalry recently that's been dominated by the LSU Tigers. So do you have that trend continuing, or do you see – I'm not even going to call this an upset because I could definitely see Florida win this one. Obviously, DJ Lagway playing would be huge for this Florida offense. So how do you see this one shaping out in Gainesville on Saturday afternoon?
Yeah, I think that's a good point there, that it's an afternoon game, and I think that helps LSU. But yeah, I mean, I think Florida's just too beat up to win this game. If they were at full strength and had DJ Lagway kind of, emerging into the star quarterback that we know he can be, I might go with the upset, but I just don't think he's going to be 100% if he plays, and I think that Florida is just too beat up overall. So give me LSU. But hey, if you got some kid that plays intramural football and can run the read option, might not be a bad idea to bring him onto the team this week as a walk-on because, it sure gives LSU some struggles. So I mean, look, Florida might give LSU some different looks than we've seen. I mean, the guy they got in there right now, Warner, he's not going to be that guy, but maybe you got an athlete on the team that can, just run the read option a little bit. And we saw them do that with Kadarius Toney some at times. So just pull out the different tricks and try to get that look, because I think that's how you can beat them.
Yeah, LSU's probably praying to God that DJ Lagway does not play in this game, because they're sick of seeing dual threat quarterbacks. Marcel Reed 1 week, you have to face Jalen Milroe. And if you have to face DJ Lagway, well,
Avia's coming up next week.
Avia, you got Jackson Arnold. Well,
I'm not too worried about him, but look, even back at Lenore Sellers, he gave this team fits.
Lenore Sellers, Jackson Dart had himself a good game too. He's a dual threat quarterback. I mean, even USC's quarterback Miller Moss, he had a good game too. And he's not really a dual threat quarterback, but he uses his legs at some point. I don't know this one. Both of these teams. I mean, LSU. This is definitely a game. I mean, what is LSU playing for at this point? What, to get to the Citrus Bowl at this point? Florida. They definitely need a couple more wins. They do have Florida State at the end of the season, so if they do win this one, they get to bowl eligibility. So that Florida, they only need 2 more wins down the stretch. So it's pretty possible if they can get this one. But I'm going to go with LSU on the road. I mean, it feels like this team always bounces back after getting bludgeoned like that. So I think that they go on the road, like you mentioned. Florida defense, I mean, they have a lot of injuries on the defensive side of the ball. So Garrett Nussmeier, I mean, walking into a hostile environment. So I'm not saying that he's going to have like a 0 turnover game, have like 500 yards passing, but this will be a back and forth game. I think the line is 5.5. I would probably go with Florida covering that plus 5.5. Who wins this one, like a field goal game. But I'm going to go with the road team here. And then we learn our lesson from last week to not pick the same team in a big game like this. Guess not. We're all going with the Tigers. So we'll see if LSU can make us happy this week. So a top 25 battle between the Columbias, number 24 Missouri at number 23 South Carolina. Missouri coming off of that wacky, wild game in Columbia, Missouri, defeating Oklahoma. Both of these teams now have common opponents. South Carolina just boat raced Oklahoma, and Missouri, well, they need a scoop and score to win that one. South Carolina, stunning performance in Nashville. So you're going to go with the Gamecocks or going to go with the Tigers on the road? We will have to see. If we see the starting quarterback for Missouri and Brady Cook, I feel like if it's not, this might be a long day for Missouri.
Yeah, there's a huge drop-off in this team with Brady Cook and Drew Pine. And honestly, Brady Cook hasn't –
it might not matter.
Yeah, he hasn't really been as good this year either, to be honest. But I think I just got to go with the hot hand. I mean, South Carolina has been playing with their pants on fire. Lenore Sellers has grown tremendously over the last few weeks. And Raheem Sanders has really just kind of come out of nowhere in a way to reassert himself as one of the top backs in the SEC. So everything's looking good for South Carolina at this point. It is an afternoon kickoff, but with daylight savings, it will be a night game pretty much, when it comes down to it in the second half. So I think South Carolina rolls here. I think they roll next week against Wofford, and that Clemson game is going to be pretty tight.
How is this not the SEC Network game? Like, what other game is better for this to be an afternoon game? I mean, come on. What are we doing in this conference?
A&M's playing at night against New Mexico State.
Are you kidding me right now? What the heck are we doing? All right, whatever.
But this one is on ESPN.
Oh, okay. Well, at least it'll be night in the second half. But I'm going to go with South Carolina. I feel pretty confident in this pick. Missouri they got the victory against Oklahoma. That defense, played well for the half and just lost it. But South Carolina, I've been picking against them. I mean, I know I've been picking against them, but this is a team I've been pretty high on. It feels like they should have like 2 losses or even 1 loss at this point, the way that they've been playing the rest of their season. But this offense finally has an identity. I mean, just hand the ball off to keep it with Lenore Sellers or hand the ball off to Raheem Sanders, you're going to put up 40. So South Carolina will probably win this one. I'll say 34-24. I think that this is a close game, but South Carolina pulls away. That defense is going to rise to the occasion. Honestly, I don't even think Missouri gets 24. I'll go 34-14. I think that South Carolina continues their dominance here. And look at that, all Gamecocks. Hey, look at that. There we go. So it's been a while since we had all three South Carolina logos on here. And I feel like South Carolina, they've been like the team for us on SEC Talk here. I feel like every week we just talk about them. So we will see what happens in Columbia, South Carolina, that is. And now we go on to our SEC Talk game of the week. This feels like, really, I'm not going to say a college football playoff eliminator, but if Georgia loses one, they are out of it. And that would be the surprise of the college football season. Tennessee could definitely afford another loss, but they would love to get this one on the road. So number 6, Tennessee, number 11, Georgia. College game day will be there. And then have the big game announcers there with Kirk Herbstreit and Chris Fowler there, I would have to assume. I mean, we've seen these matchups in the past couple of years. I feel like Tennessee gets all the hype and they just lay an egg, and Georgia just lays the hammer down. So do you finally see Tennessee, getting a big win in this rivalry game, or do you think that Georgia bounces back here?
I mean, Carson Beck has just looked so bad.
He's terrible.
And they only got 10 points against Ole Miss. I know it was on the road in the rain. You're coming back at home. But I just really like this Tennessee defense. And I think Nico has really come into his own. I think the spotlight was on him at the beginning of the year, and he played well. And then maybe kind of got exposed a little bit against Arkansas when they were playing in primetime. And I think everybody's kind of backed off on him a little bit, but that's okay because he's quietly put together a pretty nice season. And yeah, I think Tennessee gets the statement victory against Georgia because they're the better football team. And look, not to victory lap this, but I was not that high on Georgia this year, and it would be pretty validating for them to get knocked out with 3 losses with 2 weeks to go in the season. Yep. So give me Tennessee because I think that even if this was a playoff game, Tennessee would get it done.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So, yeah, you didn't even have Georgia in the SEC championship game, so this honestly wouldn't surprise you if Georgia were to lose this game. But, I've been one of the high truthers of Tennessee. I saw it in the preseason. They were my dark horse team, one of the teams that I still love. But honestly, you don't even need Nico to have a big game because Georgia's
ball.
Yeah, Georgia's rush defense has been suspect. I mean, Luis Grant had himself a game. So, I mean, if Dylan Sampson, you just hand him the ball and give him over 100 yards rushing, you're going to feel pretty good about yourself. But, yeah, I feel like Georgia's offense has really lost their identity. The season Carson Beck hasn't looked that well. I feel like he's on a streak of throwing interceptions in every game, and that could definitely be the difference maker. If either Georgia loses or win this game, this is tough for me to pick against a team that I love, but this just feels like a Georgia spot to me. I mean, Kirby Smart coming off of a loss. I mean, he's just going to get his boys prepared. This is probably going to be the toughest practice that these boys are going to have to go through the whole entire week. So this is a night game. This is a kneel, and I would probably go with Tennessee, but this is going to be a really good matchup, a low-scoring game. Both defenses have been playing well, but I am going to go with Georgia in a close matchup. Though, would I be surprised if Tennessee wins this game? No, but this just feels like a Georgia spot to me, and that's why I'm going to go with them. Chet's going to go with Georgia, so you're the lone volunteer. I feel like that's like the only difference that we had in the pick, so it's probably going to come down between Tennessee and Georgia of really shaping out these standings here for us. Because the next one ain't going to do crap for us because it's New Mexico State at 15, Texas A&M. Let's just not even.
Aggies are Aggies.
Aggies. Please stop playing these games.
The Aggie Bowl right there.
Yep, the Aggies versus the Aggies. Well, A&M will probably win this one like 52-10 and move on with their day. Let's go on to hot topics now. Speaking of Georgia, Wade, should we be concerned about Georgia's offense? And honestly, if you want to put up the player up there, should we be concerned about Carson Beck?
Yes and yes. I mean, look, this team doesn't have a wide receiver 1, and we're in week 12. They had a running back 1, but he by no means was playing like what they brought him in to be.
No.
So now they're a committee because he's banged up as it is. And we thought they might have the quarterback 1 of the draft, and he's looked like maybe he should come back for a developmental year. So this offense is just – there's no good way to look at it. Oh yeah, and Brock Bowers isn't coming out of that tunnel. So, uh, I just don't think there's anything that you can line up with a team like Tennessee and say, hey, this unit on the Georgia offense is better than this unit. Now, what you have is that fear factor that Georgia has generated over the last 5 years, much like Alabama. Look at Alabama, LSU. Pretty much every position LSU looked like they had the better unit. Didn't matter
Yep.
on Saturday. So, yes, could Georgia do that? Absolutely. But right now, yeah, I am concerned. And I think that
Oh yeah, and we
this
saw
team could get
Georgia's
exposed.
offense like come out of nowhere and play their game of their lives against Texas, so they have it in them.
Yeah.
Just can they do it?
They definitely have talented guys. I mean, you don't get a spot on that Georgia roster if you're not talented. But right now, I mean, I don't know where Carson Beck's head's at.
Yeah. All right, let's go on to the next one. Both of these teams got a pretty big victory. Ole Miss getting the victory on the road against Georgia, Alabama in a playoff contention eliminator. So both of these teams are right back in playoff contention. So once we're to this college football playoff, do you see both or just one of these teams making it to the dance?
Well, both have two conference losses, but Ole Miss's tiebreakers play a little bit to their advantage. I don't think there's room for both. I do think that one of the two will make it. And unfortunately for Ole Miss, I think those tiebreakers might play to their advantage, and they could find themselves playing in Atlanta for the conference championship game after all, just like you picked. But if they lose that, then they're out. Whereas Alabama, I think, is going to get dogged by the play-in factor, with the tiebreakers. And I think they get left out of Atlanta, but I think they make it as an at-large.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's go on to the next question. I feel like this might be a time-consuming question because we are both near and dear to this university. We are sitting in year 3 of the Brian Kelly era, and LSU already has 3 losses. Just got bludgeoned again by Alabama, 42-13. Do you think that is a time to worry in Baton Rouge if you're an LSU fan?
I just think that the expectation in Baton Rouge is always to be a top 15 team. Maybe, honestly, LSU is one of the few schools, maybe 10 offhand, that every year you can expect to contend for a championship. And that was the expectation when there was 4 playoff teams or even 2. So now that there's 12 playoff teams, that is absolutely the expectation. And this team should never really be outside of the top 15. And yeah, it's not happening. And I think the reality is this is more of a program that is kind of on the fringe of the top 25. And that's below expectations for LSU, and especially the amount of money that's being pumped into this program, specifically into Brian Kelly's pocket. So, I think it's time to worry about LSU being a championship contender. I don't think that the bottom's going to fall off this team. Like, I don't think Brian Kelly's going to have a 6-6 season or a 7-5 season, but they did not bring him in to go 8-4 or 9-3. So I'm kind of worried that LSU is never going to get over that hump and win the big game and have an 11-1 season or even a 10-2 season. They just, minus the overtime upset of Alabama on a 2-point conversion, they just don't really have that signature win.
Yeah. I mean, you do have the big victory, like if you want to call it a big win this season against Ole Miss. But I mean, honestly, you got lucky in that one. But you really look at Brian Kelly, you saw it at Notre Dame. It was the same thing. Like, you couldn't really win the big games, and you're seeing it here in Baton Rouge that, like, even in the season openers, he still can't win for some reason. But I don't know what to expect. I mean, he's not going anywhere anytime soon because I don't know for what reason you got that man a guaranteed contract for a decade, and he's getting paid $100 million. The thing that really irritates me is this team had 2 weeks to prepare, and this is how you look. And if you didn't learn from Marcel Reed, then why didn't you learn? Like, you knew what Jalen Milroe, like, we even knew it. Like, hell, let us go in there and talk to them. Like, hey, Jalen Milroe just
I think they know it's coming. They just can't do anything.
Yeah, they can't do anything about it. But I think that, yes, it is definitely time to worry in Baton Rouge. This is a program that should always be in the college football playoff. I mean, you should be like one of the top like 12 teams. I know like only 12 teams get there. But I mean, yeah, that USC loss is definitely hurting them now because even with Alabama in the loss to Texas A&M, you would still be in the dance. But now, since you lost to USC at the start of the season, you are definitely out of contention. Even chaos wouldn't even be enough because I think that LSU's time, even in that contention, they're just going to be back to another bowl game. Probably going to have a lot of opt outs because who the heck cares about playing in the Citrus Bowl when all the other teams are playing for something? So, yes, I definitely think that both of us say that it is time to worry in Baton Rouge. All right, the next one. Who do you think, which team won the weekend this week in week number 11?
It's tough because we had Alabama and Ole Miss have big weekends.
Yep.
I'm gonna give it to Alabama just because of the sheer dominance.
Yeah.
No other team has a Jalen Milroe in their back pocket that's kind of in this fringe playoff contention. So, nobody wants Alabama to get into the playoff because
Nope.
I think they could beat Oregon. I think they could beat Ohio State on any given
Well,
day. So
I don't know if I would go that.
I think they could. I mean, I think that Jalen Milroe is one player that can single-handedly put you over that edge. Not over the course of a whole season, or not if those teams played 5 times. They might not even win twice, but I think he gives you that shot in the dark factor to do it. So yeah, I'm gonna give it to Alabama just because of the sheer dominance. But Ole Miss, kudos to you too. You had a good week.
You would think I would go with Ole Miss in this situation, but I'm going to go for another team, a team that I did not think was going to be good in the preseason, but they have just surprised me and wowed me every single week, and that is the South Carolina Gamecocks. So they won the weekend. Absolute dominant performance. Vanderbilt has been like the talk of the town here in the conference, and if you watch those SEC shorts every single week, they've been doing something crazy with Vanderbilt every single week. But South Carolina, really impressive. Their defense, I feel like, has definitely impressed me. If you've been with me on the show, I feel like every single past few years, I've just absolutely dog walked of how terrible the South Carolina defense was, and they have redeemed themselves this year. So South Carolina are my winners of the weekend. Really good performance by the Gamecocks. Ole Miss will give you honorable mention because I still have faith in you to get to Atlanta and prove that I am a smart guy. But still, if they get to the college football playoff, I would still make my take in the preseason I had. So I'm going to be rooting for Ole Miss to win out and get to the playoff. Obviously, we're going to root for as many SEC teams to make the playoff. And it's looking like we're going to get a lot of chaos down the stretch here. So that is it for our show over an hour. Well, you're going to get that when you have some big games to talk about. We do have a comment. We do have it. The LSU game was terrible. They were not ready to play nor fighters. I blame the players and coaches on this game. Something needs to change as this losing streak is getting old. I completely agree. Wade, what do you think about this comment?
Yeah, sums it up. Brian Kelly even said, if you watch this game, you probably wondered, what did they do for the last 2 weeks? So yeah, like you said, they were not ready to play. The head coach admits it 10 minutes after the game. It's one thing to admit it, but you're one of the few people in the world that had something to do about changing that. We can't do anything about that here at home. You're the coach that's paid $8 million a year to make those decisions. And 2 years in a row, Jalen Milroe looks like LeBron James playing against an 8U team. Just absolute domination. And yeah, something's got to change. It doesn't mean that Brian Kelly has to get fired, but you can't keep doing what you're doing.
Yeah, I think that this is going to be do or die for this recruiting class for Brian Kelly because you got a guy, your future quarterback. Because
maybe if we're lucky.
yeah, if he stays, I know that they're in a battle in Michigan, and then obviously he was committed to LSU, but there was 300 recruits at that game. and they did not pick the right game to go to. I feel like LSU's probably going to be losing a lot of recruits because they a lot of recruits are like, damn, these people suck. Why would I want to go here? But I'm just going to shut up. I definitely agree. Honestly, I'm going to keep up this comment because how much have I agree with it? So we appreciate everybody for tuning in.
Let me ask you this one before we log off. Why would Bryce Underwood not want to go to Alabama after this weekend? I mean, like, Milrow's going to be a top 10 pick in the draft. They're going to have a hole at quarterback. Why would you choose LSU over Alabama at this point is my question.
That's a good question. I mean, I feel like, LSU was like you would not think that you would be able to get like a quarterback like Bryce Underwood. But I feel like, Joe Burrow win the Heisman with Jane Daniels. They've been able to actually show that they can produce quality quarterbacks. You see Alabama, you haven't really seen that really at the next level. So maybe that could play into it. He's trying to think of like what school can get me, to that next level where I can be a first-round draft pick. But you make a good point. I mean, Jalen Milroe, you're seeing it on the field and what he's producing. But if LSU loses Bryce Underwood, then the future isn't looking too good for this team because, I mean, you need a quarterback. I feel like what LSU is missing from this offense is a dual-threat quarterback to me because they run a lot of RPOs, and Garrett Nussmeier can't really do too much with his legs. So we will close the book on that. I feel like if we had an LSU show, we would be here forever talking about this game, but we have to close before this goes nearly 2 hours. So we appreciate everybody for tuning in to this week's show. Tune in next week as we have more big games to talk about. We will see how that Tennessee-Georgia game plays, South Carolina, Missouri, LSU, Florida, even though that game doesn't really have much to play for, but we will talk about it. And we appreciate everybody for tuning in. We will catch y'all next time on SEC Talk. So long for now.